Okay. Okay. My name is Jeffrey Scott. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I served in the United States Army. Served in the Republic of Vietnam in '71 and actually 1970 and '71. Came home in '71. I was drafted, kicking and screaming. I was in the absolute last draft before they switched over to the lotto. So I was drafted in September of 1969, and they didn't have any more draft after that. So kicking and screaming, definitely. One of their fun jokes is that when you get into the induction center, they say, "We are drafting Marines today," and they're like, "Ha ha 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 ha." But no, they don't really do that. Typically, they just draft you into the Army, is the way it happens. That's what happened to me. First day of going into boot camp, that was, they really try to traumatize you as quickly as possible. So you've got some big drill sergeant yelling and screaming, using profanities at you. And, it's just you going, holy crap, why am I here? This is not good. This is not a good thing. I think that the drill sergeant that we had, Sergeant Walters, I even remember his name yet. I didn't really think much of the platoon, or his strategy was to kind of keep you downtrodden all the time rather than trying to lift you up and make you feel good and make you feel like you're strong and able to do anything. So we were kind of the doormat of that particular training company. And he's there's something strange about about those people that are drill sergeants. I was sent from Vietnam. I first served in Texas for a little while, Fort Hood, and then after a year in, I got my levy for Vietnam. So I came home for, I think, 3 weeks, and then shipped out for Vietnam. I remember my first day there. We arrived in Cam Ranh Bay, and Cam Ranh Bay was basically all sand. And when they opened the doors and you started to step out of that commercial airplane, it was 120 degrees in Cam Ranh Bay. And the sand was between 100 and 140 degrees. You could not step on the sand, even in combat boots, because it would burn your foot. So they had wooden walkways to go everywhere. You had to stay on the walkway. You never got off the walkway. And I was only there for probably 5 or 6 hours to rest a little bit, and then they shipped us off into to the middle of the country. And that was scary. I mean, once again, going, holy crap, what am I doing here? I'm going to die here. You really kind of got that impression. I was a generator operator for most of my tour there. So this was out on what was called a mortar base. And well, this was actually on mortar base Barbara. And this was very close to the Cambodian border. And a mortar base was a very small base that berms were pushed up, and that was typically about a triangle 300 feet on a side. And you were out there all by yourself. We had 2 larger mortars that were called the 4-2s or 4-deuce mortars, and 2 smaller mortars. So what I did is I provided power for fire direction control and for the aid station for the medics, and also for the CO's camp, and helped with communications as well. So my job was basically to keep those generators running 24 hours a day. And while they were running, I sat on top of my bunker with an M16 and watched the wood line for snipers and stuff. I moved probably 5 or 6 times in Vietnam, especially still attached to that company. And every time I moved, we got hit that next day or that night. So there was a place I was on, a Swan Lock, and we're moving to another mortar base down south. And so I packed up my gear, and that next day we got mortared. I was gone, but next day the Swan Lock got hit with mortars. And when I first came in, I I was based at Dao Chiang, which was about 13 kilometers from the Cambodian border. And this is a very hot zone. And so actually went from Dao Chiang to Swan Lock, and Dao Chiang got overrun that next day, completely blown out. So I kind of skirted the combat a lot as far as having to go out there and kill people, but I did get sniped at. I got hit by friendly fire. A mortar round, one of our mortar rounds went up, straight up, and came straight back down. And it wasn't supposed to do that. Fortunately, I was down in my generator pits, and the blast just went right over my head. So, but that was scary. That got me on the ground real fast. So I came home September 13th, 1971. And I certainly remember that day big time. So there's this thing. When you first come in the country, you're scared just constantly. You're terrified because of there's so much going on. You've got these big, huge guns going off, and every time they go off, you're pretty much on the ground. And then after about a month in country, you get an attitude of just, screw it. If I get killed, I get killed, and there's not much I can do about it. So you kind of you disconnect or you dissociate from a lot what's going on. This is where a lot of people start drinking heavily and smoking a lot of ganja. Kansai is what it was called, and also start using harder drugs and stuff like that, harder alcohol. And then when you start getting towards the end of your tour, you start getting short. And that's when you start getting real nervous, real twitchy again. You're getting close to going home to the real world, to the world. And so you start getting real cautious about and scared about what if I get blown up? Well, like the sergeant got run over 6 days before he was supposed to go home. That's really forefront in your mind. And so it's called skying up. And I remember getting on the truck and heading to Long Binh, which is where the Naval Air Force Base was, and getting ready to go on get on the airplane and go home. I actually had an ear infection at that time, but there was no way I was going to tell anybody, a medic or anything, that I had any problems with my ears, because they would have kept me there. And so I remember when it was wheels up on the run, just leaving the runway, it's finally like, wow, going home. I was exhausted. I mean, it was a 36-hour flight. I did sleep some, but a lot of it, I had pain in my ear, so I wasn't really able to rest very well. And coming into Oakland is where you came in to separate. ETS is what it's called, estimated time of separation. And it took about 24 to 48 hours to go through that process and actually get out. So there was a lot of anxiety at that time. And, well, let's just get this done. Get me on a plane, get me home, where I can start resting and start getting my feet back on the ground. You don't get really close to anybody because they could be gone the next day. There was one day I lost seven people due to an RPG ambush. 7 people gone, boom, just like that. But you do also get kind of a bond. You expect for people to watch your back, and you watch other people's backs. But some weird stuff that happened. There were a lot of drugs that in 70, 71, and then we're talking real hardcore heroin, China White, 98% pure. And there were a number of people that I considered my friends, the kind of people that just give you the shirt off their back. And I started doing skag. They turned into just the most terrible people that you could imagine. And I think this is very common with veterans, that they want a disconnect from that. And so, no, there's nobody that that I continued to communicate with, or that I really wanted to. Like I say, I wanted to get it behind me. I wanted to start a new life. I joined the VFW, the Veteran Foreign Wars, in actually February of this year. And you know what? That has been really over and above what I expected it to be. That there's some really good people there that served in the same era. And there's younger people, the Afghanistan people in Iraq. And it really has been a lot, very rewarding for me. The VFW steps up and does a lot for supporting the troops, for supporting people that are disadvantaged and really need a lot of help, and veterans themselves that are having problems, PTSD, and also just readapting to society, and supporting art, supporting writing, supporting the opportunity to take leadership leadership classes, and there's a lot that the VFW does. And the particular post that I'm with, Post 1, was the very first post in the United States. It was established in 1899, and it was established to represent and work for veterans' rights from the Civil War. And it's still going strong. It's one of the most awarded posts in the United States. For about 2 or 3 months, I didn't do anything, really, other than just kind of decompress and try to associate with the world around me again. Kind of get to know my parents again, and get to know my brother and my sisters. My one sister, anyway. My other sister was up in Denver. This was in a little valley southwest of Pueblo called Beulah. And it was a real peaceful place, good place to decompress. And then I had saved some money while I was in Vietnam, and I bought a little house in Pueblo. But I really was still kind of lost, not knowing what to do or how to do it or where to go, and there really wasn't a lot of support from the VA to help you to kind of get your feet back on the ground. I didn't know anything about the VFW or any of those organizations at the time. Actually, my folks, when had opened a restaurant, started a little restaurant called The Host. And so my folk, I remember my folks coming in and saying, well, what are you going to do here? What's your future? And I had no answer there. And they said, we want you to come and work in the restaurant. And we want you to start waiting tables and just kind of learn the business and help with some of the cooking and so forth. And learn how to tend bar and that stuff. And I said, okay. I mean, I thought about it. I was resistant to it to begin with. But I said, okay, yeah, I think that's a good move. And you know what? That was a great move by my folks and by me. That was a lot of fun. That restaurant was incredible as far as the food goes. My dad was the cook, the chef. My mom was the hostess. My little sister was the bus girl, and I was a waiter. And we had other waiters other than me, but that place just rocked on a Saturday night and a Friday night and Sunday too. And I made really good money for that time, tips. And you only had to work like 20 hours a week. This was only open at dinner time. But the comments that you got from people, the quality of the food, and the people who had come from, people drive 100 miles to come to this restaurant. And it just absolutely was one of the best experiences I had. From there, my actual education in the Army was for wheeled vehicle mechanic. I got a certification there. So after the host, I worked at a gas station for a while, and then I got tired of that. I went back and what did I do after that? I got my pilot's license, and I started working in principally. I was always good with my hands, and I started doing some woodworking. Uh, my parents had retired from the host, and but my dad just was going crazy with nothing to do, so they bought another restaurant and renovated that restaurant. And then they asked me, well, okay, come on up and work this one with us. So I helped put it together, and I worked that one, and we sold it, and everybody walked away with some good cash. I went to Sun Valley and hung out there, and unfortunately, it was the year of the ski drought, the snow drought, so there was zero snow in Sun Valley. So beyond that, I've done a lot of other stuff. My film career, I got a diploma in tour management and ran a tour company for a while. I've been a tour guide for a couple of other companies around here. Um, I got a certification, a master's certification in neuro-linguistic programming, which is a psychology discipline. Gosh, became a master woodworker and also a master finisher as well. The restaurant, that was real. That was good therapy. I mean, that got me re-engaged. It gave me a life again. So that part of it, and they're insisting that I come to work for them. That was really good. That was really good. So, and we went on to do 3 restaurants after that. It was 51 years ago when I first came back from Vietnam, and you know, a lot of it's behind me, but there's still times that are just as fresh as yesterday. And one thing, there never was a Vietnam War. It was the Vietnam conflict. It was never declared a war. And because of that, at that time, a lot of the veterans did not get the benefits they should have because it wasn't a war, it was a conflict. And anybody that was there pretty much, unless they were career military or something like that, they would say, what the hell are we here for? Why are we here? What are we doing here? Because it was just ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. One of the things is that when you looked at the published statistics, they always say, well, 50,000 people, Americans, lost their lives in Vietnam. But that's not true. That is only conflict lives lost, combat lives lost. There was a lot of lives lost and Americans that were killed in non-combat situations. So the Vietnamese, the ARVNs, the Army of Vietnam, they didn't know how to drive at all. They were used to driving mopeds and Lambrettas and stuff, and all of a sudden they've got these 5 tons and big diesel trucks and so forth, and they're tearing down the road. They couldn't hardly see over the steering wheel, and they ran over a lot of Americans. Example being that, and I mentioned earlier about this sergeant that was ready to go home, had 6 days to go home, and he was killed. He was backed over by an ARVN 6 days before he was supposed to go home. And this happened all the time. And talking about why we were there, the way this war was waged was just absolutely ridiculous. Vietnam is only the size of California. Now, do you think in 8 to 10 years' time, we could go take and establish a beach a hold in the Southern California and go all the way to the top of Northern California and secure that and hold it? Absolutely. Same thing in Vietnam. We could have started in the Delta and marched to the DMZ and held that. But the way that it worked, and I saw this happen time and time again, there would be an infiltration, there would be basically a bunker set up of NVA. So there was the NVA, which was the North Vietnamese Army. These were professional soldiers. And then there was the Viet Cong. Viet Cong were the black pajamas and the funny hats. And they were the ones that are making the punji pits and stuff like that. So these bunkers are made out of concrete in the middle of the jungle. So we'd find one of these and we'd get the tanks and the tracks in there to secure it. And then we'd go in and we'd blow everything up. They'd bring the engineers in. They'd level it. They'd blow everything up. And then we'd pull back, leave it unsecured. And within 3 to 4 weeks, all that concrete bunkers were rebuilt again. They would find a way just to get that concrete in there and rebuild the whole thing. That first insurgents in there to secure it, we probably lost 10 or 12 guys, including the tunnel rats going in and stuff like that. And so we'd pull back and they'd rebuild, and we'd go back in the same place. And we'd lose 10 or 12 guys. We'd blow it up. We'd pull back out, leave it unsecured. And they'd come back and they'd rebuild it again. A month later, it's all back. And we go in again. And tracks go in, we lose 10, 12, maybe 20 guys this time. And we blow it up again. And then we'd pull back. How is that any way to win a war? It isn't. It was designed not to be won. It was designed to stimulate economy. Dow Chemical, Bayer with Agent Orange, creating Agent Orange, General Motors, Chrysler, Dodge, all these people are making the tanks and the half-tracks. They got fat off of this, off American blood. And just about anybody that was there that wasn't, a Marine or somebody that was really engaged in hand-to-hand combat in the north, right at the DMZ, then they all were going, what the hell are we doing here? And there was a lot of people that refused to hump. I saw this a lot when I was out on Barbara, that we'd have people, we'd get these, the grunts would come in, a platoon or 2 platoons would come in and be able to relax for the first time in probably 2 or 3 weeks. And they'd able to get cleaned up and resupply and refresh and so forth. And a lot of times people would refuse to go back out again. So they put them in handcuffs and haul them away. All for what? What is it today? It's communist. And yet, if you go back, I would go back again. In fact, I may have an opportunity to go film some tigers and leopards there. And my understanding from people that have gone back, that they treat us as heroes. If you're an American GI that was there, you are number one. So I want to talk about the drugs and what happened there. In 71, now most of the materials that the AK-47s that just about all the Vietnamese were using, the North Vietnamese, coming out of Russia. Everything else was pretty much coming out of China. Chi-Com grenades, landmines, stuff like that, all out of China. And China decided to demoralize the American troops by getting them all addicted to heroin if they could. And so they started shipping 98% pure China white heroin down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and infiltrated just overwhelmed the country. And you could buy 2 grams of pure China white for about $5. And you could buy that from any cowboy. A cowboy was 8 to 10-year-old Vietnamese kid on a corner going, as you drove by in your Jeep, "Hey Joe, want to buy Skag?" $5, man. And it would take, if you took it, most people smoked it. They rolled the end of a little tobacco out of the end of a cigarette, put some Skag in there, some heroin in there, and smoked it. 2 to 3 days, you would be hooked. And as I mentioned earlier, you see a complete transition in people's personalities, going from the good guys to basically so self-absorbed, almost to the point of evil. Really is out of control, totally out of control, and demoralized. The Chinese were able to do that. Now, it's about 60% of the people who are coming home when I came home were strung out on heroin. And the VA really didn't acknowledge that. They did not do anything at all to help with that. And there's a song by John Prine, Sam Stone. Tells about Sam Stone coming home from the conflict with a habit. Well, he shattered all his nerves and left some shrapnel in his knees and a hole in his arm. And he died from it. Very true story. Very true ballad. It happened. So what else can I say about that time and what it means now? When you think about these guys, and I was actually pretty fortunate that, and every time I go to the VA hospital and I see these guys without legs and arms, I'm real lucky. So I do suffer from PTSD, and some hard nights sometimes. But as we come up on Veterans Day, I think about those people, the loss.